right, welcome to the next lesson, last lesson for chapter 27, and it's going to be about excretion. And your first thing you might want to think of is getting rid of the solid waste that we usually get rid of, but it's actually not excrete. So that was actually part of the digestion system when we talked about getting food in us and getting nutrients and then breaking that down for energy. And we talked about anything that didn't get digested or broken down, we would just get rid of it, eliminate the waste that way. But this lesson is about getting rid of a different type of waste. Ammonia, to be specific, is the main compound that we are concerned with. We'll talk about what we do with that compound before we get rid of it, though, depending on what animal you are. But when we talk about excretion, again, it's key to remember that we're not talking about solid foods that we did not digest. That's a totally different story. This chapter is actually about the kidneys, more specifically. If you want to talk about us, at least, we have kidneys that make urine, and then we pee out urine. That's the kind of excretion that we're talking about. We're trying to get rid of the urine. But urine has something very specific inside of it called urea. And urea is essentially a compound that is less toxic than the compound you see there actually on my wall. I'm actually using that for an electron dot illustration, so I can use that for hopefully with chemistry too, because we're talking about electrons and their arrangements inside of atoms. And just a really simple electron diagram that you can do is just by using dots like that. It doesn't tell the whole story, but if you want to talk about the electron sharing between atoms, or you want to illustrate that in a way, you can use those. They're called Lewis dot structures. And basically that nitrogen with the 3 hydrogens there is ammonia. It's NH3. It has the formula NH3, so I can write that here for you in case you ever see it. It's actually a very popular compound. So it has the molecular formula NH3. It's 1 nitrogen with 3 hydrogens. And so you can see that nitrogen is sharing electrons with the 3 hydrogens around it. Pretty basic compound, but it's super toxic. I actually don't know if I have some in my lab here, my studio / lab. I didn't bring any with me, but you can go to the store and buy straight cleaning ammonia. And if you take the lid off, it's super strong. It burns your nose just to smell it. If you have Windex or any kind of a window cleaner or something like that, it'll probably have ammonia in it, and you can smell it that way too. And it's very strong. It burns your nose. And well, imagine that ammonia, it's a gas. Imagine that ammonia gas being dissolved in your blood and being carried throughout your tissues. Super toxic. Not good, not good. Just like carbon dioxide gas, by the way. Toxic at high levels in the body, so we have to get rid of it. We think of it as a bad thing for greenhouse gases or global warming or whatever, but we're actually blowing it out. We're getting rid of it for a reason, because it's extremely toxic at high levels. And so is ammonia. Probably more toxic is the ammonia. And so what do we do with that ammonia? Actually, first of all, where does it come from? Well, ammonia, since it has nitrogen in it, is going to be coming from the breakdown of proteins. So we just did a chapter on protein synthesis, right? When we talked about how DNA is used to assemble amino acids. DNA is the code for what amino acids will get assembled together to form a polypeptide. Well, every single amino acid, all 20 of them, are basically nitrogen containing compounds. They have nitrogens, they also have carbons and sometimes oxygen and lots of hydrogens. And so when we break those things down, those amino acids, into smaller pieces, we basically are going to end up with ammonia as our final product, and that's what we want to get rid of. And so the body either you got to get rid of it quickly, or you can take it and make it into a less toxic compound before you have to get rid of it, like urea. And so let's look at, again, the lecture here. So we're in 27.4, excretion. And so how do we manage toxic nitrogenous waste is one of the questions. How do aquatic animals do it, and how do land animals do that, while also conserving water? You'll see how water plays a key role in all this. And so again, the ammonia problem is that animals produce ammonia by breaking down proteins, because proteins are full of amino acids, and every amino acid is basically a nitrogen-containing compound. And so it's poisonous, is what the book says here. Even moderate concentrations of ammonia can kill most cells. All right? And so animals, you can do a couple things. You can quickly get rid of it, quickly eliminate it, or you can convert it into some other nitrogenous compound that's less toxic. And whatever you do, the elimination of those waste, those metabolic waste, they're basically waste products from the metabolism process. Metabolism just means breaking down stuff for energy. And so when you're breaking down proteins for energy, you're going to end up with these wastes, and you're going to take that waste, which is ammonia, and get rid of it. That's called excretion, okay? So that's what this whole lesson's about. Some animals that live in like wet environments, it's really easy for them to just get rid of it quickly. Okay, the first option was to just get rid of it quickly by literally allowing it to diffuse out of their body fluids across the skin. So it just comes out the skin and then into the water. So fish actually do that. For example, goldfish. Goldfish are extremely notorious for that. Or koi fish also, they produce a lot of ammonia specifically. I mean, like all fish do this, but specifically like goldfish and koi, they're kind of a dirty fish. They just produce a lot of ammonia, and that ends up making the water pretty toxic and killing other fish, or it makes the water very even inhospitable for the fish themselves, and sometimes they'll die just because the fish tank didn't get cleaned very good. And so, or more specifically, there's actually bacteria that can handle the ammonia. Denitrifying bacteria can actually handle that. So you actually want certain bacteria in your fish tank. That's why you have to let your fish tank cycle for a few weeks before you actually just go throw fish in there. And if you throw fish in there, don't just go throwing a bunch of goldfish in there. You're going to end up in trouble. So basically, let's get back to the lecture here. Basically, if you're going to make some compound, though, that's less toxic and store it for a little bit, you have a couple different ways of doing that. So one of the ways, like, for example, insects and reptiles and birds, is they'll make what's called uric acid. Uric acid. It's much less toxic. Also, less soluble in water. So less soluble in water means that uric acid can't stay dissolved in water like you would dissolve your sugar or salt in water. And so that's good, because that means the blood can't carry it around anymore. And so that means you can do something with it, right? It means you can filter it, you can separate it and do something with the body tissues, can do something with it when it's less soluble. If it's soluble, it's like, well, how do you get it out of the liquid, right? That's kind of a difficult process if it's soluble. So making uric acid is a pretty strategic way of doing that. But mammals and some amphibians, on the other hand, convert it to a different nitrogenous compound that's called urea. And so, like uric acid, it's less toxic, but the main difference is that urea is highly soluble in water. So we can dissolve urea in water to make urine and then pee it out. Okay, so if we're going to do that, we're obviously going to need water. Every time we're making ammonia, we're going to produce urea, and then we're going to dissolve it in water to make urine. So urine just means water and urea. It's urea, though, is the compound that we're really concerned with here. But the point I'm trying to make is here that if you're wanting to get rid of urea, you're going to need water to make urine, because water and urea make urine. And so urine is not very efficient as far as water goes, because you're going to be needing to always have water around. And if you're living in a dry environment, or you're an organism that needs to conserve water, that could be a problem for you. So you'll see what we do there. And so moving on, you can't really see this in the image I took here, but if you have your book at home, you might be able to see it better. But even still, I don't think that's a very good image. What they're trying to show there is bird poop on some rocks. And so I have much better pictures of bird poop on rocks, because I'm a fisherman, a kayak fisherman. And so I wanted to show you a picture I have here. This is a place I like to go kayaking at Dana Point. There's my kayak, my net, and my pole. And look at these rocks. So there's a bunch of pelicans and seagulls on this jetty here at Dana Point. And these rocks are supposed to be like gray or whatever. But if you look at them, they're like solid white. With these, they look like white streaks. And it almost looks like the rocks are supposed to be white or like they've been painted. That's literally what it looks like. They look like they've been painted. But let's see if I can find another picture. I thought I downloaded 2 of them onto my desktop. I know I did. I just gotta find it. It's like playing Where's Waldo on my desktop here. I think it's that one. Yeah, it is this one. Really cool point. So Salt Creek's just on the other side of this. This is just south of Salt Creek. This is the point that hangs out. It's actually Dana Point right there. And this is the big harbor, a boat harbor where I do a lot of kayaking. So stay tuned. I'm actually going to show you guys a video of some bioluminescence I found there the other night. It's actually, it might even still be there. But so the point is, in this video, I'm talking about excretion and all the and all that. So here at Dana Point on this jetty, you can see again all this bird poop here. That's uric acid. That's uric acid that has a little bit of water in it and actually some other wastes too. So the birds have a really efficient way of not only getting rid of the uric acid, but they go ahead and eliminate some of their poop as well in the same process. And so you get this really sticky stuff here that doesn't really dissolve in water very well. And when the waves come up and crash, there's these little pockets here of water, and you can see the uric acid crystals in there. Like they look like little, looks like almost like glass when it's really dry. But once it's dissolved, or once the water's here, you can see that it doesn't even really dissolve in the water. It's like in the water, but it's not dissolved. And so it looks like little pieces of glass, like in the water. And those are uric acid crystals. They don't dissolve very well, and really slippery too, by the way. And so it's some nasty stuff. But that is basically the bird's way of getting rid of ammonia, and it stinks really bad. It stinks almost like ammonia, and it's probably because the uric acid is turning back into ammonia, the process of oxygen and stuff in the air. And so, anyways, so again, if you're going to get rid of any type of nitrogenous waste, it's going to involve water. So for that reason, it's really important to find a proper balance, and that's what kidneys have to do. Kidneys operate basically on the principle of osmosis. So the way they do it is, again, number one, first of all, they have to maintain a proper balance. So that's really important. That's a hard struggle. Especially when, like I said, the way they operate is through the process of osmosis, because kidneys can't just pump water. Your cells, remember, your kidneys is just a big collection of cells. Kidneys is an organ. Kidney is an organ that's made up of a tissue that's made up of cells. And so every cell cannot actively pump water. It doesn't work that way. Water is pumped another way. If you remember, back in chapter 2, we talked about osmosis. If you have a semi-permeable membrane like this here, and you have a high concentration of particles in some water there, and a low concentration of particles in some water there, the water is going to move, assuming that this semi-permeable membrane does not allow the particles to move. The water will move instead to try to equal out the concentrations, so that you have equal concentrations on the left and right. Now you might say on this picture, but those aren't equal. Well, yeah, they're not equal in volume, but they're equal in concentrations. If you were to count how many particles there are here in terms of water molecules compared to, it would be the same number as the ratio of water molecules to particles on the left side. It'd be the same concentration. What would it be, like 5%, whatever? They're both 5% concentrations on the left and right. But here, it's obviously, this is a way higher concentration than over here, even though they're like the same amount of liquid, okay? So, this process is called osmosis, which is the movement of water, not particles, but the movement of water. And that's totally passive. If you just let this beaker sit here, it'll take time, but it'll eventually happen. And it's totally passive. No ATP is required, no energy is required. And that's how the kidneys move water, is by that principle. So yeah, they've got some salts to move first. That's actually what they do, is they actively move salts, and then the water just follows behind. And so we're not going to go into a whole detail about how the kidneys work. It's actually a phenomenal organ and the way they do it. And there's a lot of little microstructures that we could analyze in terms, but this is not anatomy and physiology. You just need to know that kidneys are the organs that we use to do that. All right, and remember, kidneys make urea. Well, yeah, your kidneys actually make the urea and make urine, which urine is just urea and water. Okay, so let's look at aquatic animals and land animals, the difference there. And so with aquatic animals, it's actually kind of easy. They basically can just, at least a lot of the aquatic animals can just do it through their skin, out their bodies, surrounding water. So they can allow ammonia to diffuse out of their bodies just into the surrounding water. And that water is just going to dilute the ammonia and carry it away. So it's quite easy process. But aquatic animals, they face another sort of challenge, and that is with the water that is in them and the water that they are in, because there needs to be a balance. Remember, water will move. Water will move even though you don't want it to move, because it's going to chase salt. And so let's look at the difference between a freshwater fish and a saltwater fish. This is why you can't just put saltwater fish inside of a freshwater tank or freshwater fish inside the ocean. They won't live because their bodies are designed to do things differently. And it has to do with this concept here. So freshwater fish, they're usually going to have some salts in their cells. That's just the way it works. Cells operate by using salts across the membrane. They pump the salt ions across the membranes and so on. And they've also got sugar and other particles and proteins. And so it would be hypertonic, if you will. And the water around the fish is very hypotonic. It's basically just water. There's no salt. This is fresh water. And so what's going to want to happen is water is going to want to go into the fish to dilute it. And so this fish is always trying to fight this scenario. This is what's trying to happen, but the fish is trying to fight this. And so the way that the fish fights this so that this doesn't happen is it basically needs to get rid of water. And so the way it does it is it urinates a lot. Not a lot of stuff in there. There's not a lot of ammonia in the urine, but it's doing it basically just to get rid of water, right? So they excrete water through their kidneys that pass through lots of, they excrete water through kidneys that produce lots of very watery urine. So that's what I mean by dilute. It's very watery. And they don't drink. They try not to drink as much water as they can. When they open their mouth, it's actually just to pump water across the gills. Water goes in the mouth, and then remember, it goes past the gills. That's so that they can get oxygen and gas exchange across the surface area of the gills because of the capillaries that exist there. But they're not drinking it into their stomachs. They can if they want. All right, that's actually what the saltwater fish does. So check it out. With saltwater fish, yes, they've got some solutes inside of their cells, but they live in a very salty environment. An environment that's way higher solute concentration or way hypertonic to the fish itself. So since the fish is hypotonic to the environment around it, what's going to want to happen? Water's going to want to leave the fish and try to dilute the ocean. Well, that's not going to happen. But it's a battle they're always trying to fight, and so the fish are trying to fight this situation right here where water is trying to leave them and dilute the ocean. And so how do they do that? They need to maintain their water. They need to hold on to as much water as possible. So yes, they urinate, but it's a very little amount of urine. And basically they try to drink as much water as they can. They drink as much water as they can so that they can get some water in them. I know it's salty water, but at least they're getting some water in, and they're going to try to urinate very little. Okay, they're trying to conserve water by producing very little concentrated urine, super concentrated urine. But as far concentrated means like for the urine, for the urea. But they're not trying to get rid of a lot of water. Okay, so let's look at. We looked at the difference there between freshwater animals and saltwater animals. That's a nice diagram. You could probably do a Google search of freshwater and saltwater fish dilemma, and you'll see lots of other illustrations of this that might make more sense than this little cartoon, but I'm just going to leave this so we can start talking about terrestrial or land animals. basically the way they work is they got to conserve water. That's their main problem. They're not in water. They're not swimming around in water, so they're kind of at a loss here because they really need to maintain as much water as they can. Okay, unless they're drinking a lot of water. But let's say you didn't have a lot of water around, and the challenge would be because you still got to get rid of the waste. And so we're going to do a couple distinctions here. We're going to look at, there's some good pictures here we'll look at along with the text. But basically we're going to look at invertebrates and we're going to look at vertebrates. So you kind of see the pattern with all these sections. We're kind of looking at invertebrates and vertebrates. They're both animals. But because remember, all chapter 27 and all chapter 28 are about animal systems. But the invertebrate animals like mollusks, which would be like seashells or again, or like octopus or squid. Annelids, which would be another phylum. There would be like earthworms and all different kinds of worms. Basically, the way they're going to do it is they're going to produce urine inside of what are called nephridia. Nephridia, that's plural. Nephridium would be the singular. And so there's a bunch of these little nephridiums. So we have a bunch of, call all of that nephridia. And basically each nephridia looks like this. If you were to zoom in on one nephridia, it would look like this. It would have a nephrostome and an excretory pore. And the way it works is they're like, this whole thing is like a big tube-like structure that filter body fluid. And basically the body fluid is going to enter the nephridia through these openings called the nephrostomes. So these are like openings, and the body fluid is going to enter the nephrostome, and it's going to work its way through these tubes. And as it's doing that, it's becoming more and more concentrated with urea. And then finally, urine is going to leave the body through the excretory pore. So there's a whole bunch of excretory pores. So all along the earthworm are those excretory pores where urine should be leaving. So do you see how it works? Body fluid comes in the nephrostome and then works its way through the tubes. And as it's working its way through the tubes, it's just collecting more and more and more urea. So it's becoming more concentrated. Other terrestrial invertebrates, such as insects like this arthropod. Arthropod is another class. Actually, Insecta is a class. Arthropods is a phylum. Other terrestrial invertebrates, such as insects, arachnids, they're going to convert ammonia into uric acid, kind of like the birds did. Uric acid, remember, is less soluble in water, but still less toxic than ammonia. And then basically they use what are called Malpighian tubules. Malpighian tubules are tiny structures that basically the way they're going to work is they're going to concentrate the waste. They're going to concentrate the waste and then add them to the digestive waste. So remember, digestive system, you're going to digest and absorb all the food you can for energy, structural components, or whatever you need it for. But anything you can't use, you're going to poop it out. Well, in this case, you're also going to poop out your poop with the nitrogenous waste. So it's like pee and poop coming out the same hole. Sorry, don't mean to be immature there, but I'm trying to get you to remember this. So Malpighian tubules, like insects, they're basically making pee and poop at the same time. That's the way these Malpighian tubules work. That's the highlight function of Malpighian tubules, is that they are combining nitrogenous waste. They're combining nitrogenous waste, such as the uric acid, and putting it with digestive waste that would be traveling through the gut. And then, of course, water just gets reabsorbed. And there's going to be little tiny crystals, uric acid crystals, after the water's reabsorbed, because then there'll be less water. And so obviously that's when crystals form, is when water leaves and solids are allowed to coalesce back together. They make crystals. And so you'll have this thick paste again, which leaves the body through the anus, right? So you're having your nitrogenous waste leave the anus, actually. And that paste contains almost no water, really. And so that's the way you're going to minimize water loss. Okay, but what about vertebrates? Vertebrates like us, or actually there's a few distinctions here. It's first of all in the vertebrates, it's carried out by the kidneys. So that's an important note to make. So it's we have two kidneys, one on the left, one on the right. That we have two kidneys that will produce urea and dump it into our bladder. And when the bladder's full, there's a neurological response. A nerve signal gets sent to the brain that says, "Hey, I got to pee," and then you have muscles that will allow you to squeeze the urine out. All right. Excuse me. But mammals are going to use kidneys. But mammals and land amphibians, they're going to convert ammonia again to urea, which gets excreted in urine. In most reptiles, though, and birds, ammonia is converted into uric acid. So reptiles and birds are vertebrates, aren't they? Reptiles and birds are vertebrates, but they don't make urea, they make uric acid. We should have done a Venn diagram. If we were in class, I'd make you guys do a Venn diagram between uric acid and urea. They're both nitrogenous waste. They're both less toxic than ammonia, but uric acid is less soluble in water and urea is more soluble in water. And we make urea. Urea gets turned into urine. Uric acid just gets secreted, sometimes with poop, sometimes just out, depending on what the organism is. And so back to the cavity here. The way reptiles and birds, they pass uric acid through ducts into a cavity that also receives digestive waste from the gut. So kind of like back up here with the Malpighian tubules is sort of the way that works too, with the same concept. You're basically adding it to digestive waste. Same thing down here. You're receiving digestive waste from the gut, and you're adding that to the uric acid. And then that'll absorb most of the water from the waste. The walls of the cavity will absorb most of the water, putting it back into the organism. And then the uric acid will just separate out as white crystals. And the result is a thick, milky paste that you would recognize as bird droppings. All right, and then there's a couple adaptations to extreme environments, like this bird here actually has little pores on the side of its head that can release salty water so that extra salt can be released so that it doesn't overwhelm the kidneys, is what the book says here. Otherwise, the animal would die of dehydration. So that would be the kidneys of a terrestrial vertebrate in an extreme environment. All right, and so basically, if we look at the key questions, why does the metabolic waste of ammonia produce a problem for all animals? Why does the metabolic waste ammonia pose a problem for all animals? Well, it's toxic. I think is the only way to answer that question is at this level. It's a toxic gas, and you got to get rid of it. It poses a problem because you're constantly breaking down proteins and other compounds and making ammonia, so you got to get rid of it. But it's toxic is the main reason. How do insects, reptiles, and birds eliminate ammonia? So those are all going to be different, aren't they? Also, how do mammals and some amphibians eliminate it? So maybe we just want to talk about two differences there. Insects, reptiles, and birds, they make that uric acid stuff that's less soluble. Mammals and some amphibians make urea, don't they? Which ends up being urine. 1C says, how do kidneys help maintain homeostasis while processing nitrogenous waste? Ooh, that's a loaded question. You could write a whole essay on that if you wanted to, but basically, the kidneys are going to be always fighting osmosis. And so, how do they maintain homeostasis while processing nitrogenous waste? So what I would do is if you were to look for a good sentence here, I would scroll back up to where it talks about kidneys. Where did it mention kidneys? Here, right? and maintaining water balance. Here you go. So what's going to happen is, again, you can write a whole essay, but skip a lot of this stuff in the beginning here and just kind of go to this sentence here. The kidneys are going to be using the process of osmosis, but the way they do that is they're first, we have a little sort of a progression here, so you're going to put this first. Kidney cells are first going to pump ions from salt to create osmotic gradients. Water then is going to follow. So the kidneys are going to move salt, and then water will go where the salt goes. So that's how kidneys are going to do that separation. So they don't really excrete salt. The process works well, but leaves kidneys with one weakness. They usually cannot excrete excess salt. So how do kidneys help maintain homeostasis while processing nitrogenous waste? By actively pumping salt first, then the water would follow. 2a, in general, how do aquatic animals address the ammonia problem? So the way aquatic animals address the ammonia problem is, simply just diffusing it across their skin or outside of their bodies. They diffuse. In general, aquatic animals just allow ammonia to diffuse out of their bodies into the surrounding water, which then will dilute the ammonia. So again, they don't actually convert it to anything. They just directly eliminate it into the water. And then how do the differing water balance needs of freshwater animals and saltwater animals explain the difference in their excretion of nitrogenous waste? How do the differing water balance needs? Well, basically, you need a sentence that says, what are the water balancing needs for freshwater animals and saltwater animals? And then how does that explain how does that affect their difference in the way they excrete nitrogenous waste? Well, the freshwater animals are going to have what are we answering first? Sorry. Their water balance needs. So the freshwater animals are trying to get rid of water. They're trying to get rid of water so they don't look like this. Otherwise, this would be the result if osmosis was just left to happen. So freshwater animals are trying to get rid of excess water by producing lots of really, really watery urine. Saltwater organisms, saltwater fish, you should say, are trying to conserve water or keep as much water as they can. So they actually drink water and excrete very concentrated but low levels of urine. So they excrete a little amount of urine but has high concentrations of ammonia inside of it. Okay, so they can conserve water. In what form do annelids and mollusks, insects and arachnids, mammals and land amphibians, and reptiles and birds excrete nitrogenous waste? So in what form do they? So basically when they say form, they're looking for uric acid, urea, or ammonia. What form do they excrete it? And also you could mention what little structures do they use? What little structures do they use? Like the annelids. The annelids here use the nephridia, and they are making urea, right? They produce urine. So annelids, the mollusks and annelids, they make urine and they use the nephridia. Insects and arachnids, they're here. the insects and arachnids. So where was that sentence? Do you remember? Insects and arachnids. Where did I see that sentence? Oh, sorry, I'm far away. Let me scoot a little closer here. Oh, where did I see that sentence? There it is. It's because it was bold. I'm trying to look for a sentence that wasn't bold. I can preach to you guys all the time to look for the key sentences here because they answer the key questions. But sometimes they try to look for answers that are not the key sentences because they want to trick you to make you actually look a little harder for the answer. But this wasn't one of those. So they also use these Malpighian tubules. But what you got to remember is what compound do they make? And it's the uric acid, not urea. Remember the annelid, the nephridia was the structure, urea was the compound. For arthropods or arachnids, the question was addressing, use Malpighian tubules to get rid of the compound uric acid. Uric acid. The third one, there's 4 of them here, huh? Mammals and land amphibians. They're going to use kidneys to make urea. That one's really easy and obvious because it refers to us. So you should know about your kidneys making urea, which is urine, and amphibians, land amphibians at least, are going to be the same way. Reptiles and birds, how do they do it? Well, they also use reptiles and birds. They don't use... Well, we didn't talk about what structures they use, so it's okay. You don't have to talk about those. But just say that the ammonia is converted into uric acid. You could mention that it's combined with digestive wastes too. 3b, explain how differing water balance needs relate to an animal's conversion of ammonia to either urea or uric acid. So that's where that Venn diagram would come in handy if I said we were going to do a Venn diagram about urea and uric acid. Both urea and uric acid are less toxic than ammonia. Urea is more soluble in water, so you can make urine and expel it through, you can put it in a bladder and then you can pump it out whatever organ you can. Uric acid, though, is less soluble in water, and so you can collect it and then get rid of it as like a crystal. You can get rid of it as like a crystal, dried crystal. Okay, you can pull the water out of the uric acid and secrete it as like a crystal because it's less soluble in water, so you can kind of collect it inside of a cavity or whatever like that. But urea is just going to keep wanting to move around in the blood, because staying dissolved, and that can be a problem. So that's why uric acid comes out pasty and urea comes out inside of urine, and you can't even see the urea. You could actually dry the water in your urine and get it down to the urea crystals, though. You can do that. You can actually buy urea crystals too. Lots of nitrogen in the urea, and they use that as fertilizer or for other reasons, chemistry. All right, we're going to move on to the next chapter next time. Until now, thanks for watching, and I don't have anything special that I'm adding to the excretory chapter, so that's going to be it. Ta-da!